Greetings and welcome to the HALOCAST. I'm Brad Barker, your host. Please join us each episode as we explore all of the tech, trends, and personalities that keep us safe and help get us better prepared for what's next.
Hello, Allan.
Hello, Brad. How are you?
I'm doing great, my friend. And you?
I'm good. I'm really good.
Well, where exactly are you in the world?
I'm in a place called Larne. It's on the north coast of Northern Ireland. My house overlooks the coast of Scotland, and we're just on the Glens of Antrim near the Giant's Causeway. About 25 miles from the capital, Belfast.
Well, could you do me a favor and just let me know a little bit about your background, because you and I got together. I guess you found us through a Google search or something. How did this all come to pass here?
Well, really and truly, it's because of the work that Ken Pennington and myself do, and the work we've engaged in the last year to do with decision making. Every night, without fail, Ken will send me a whole list of things that he's picked up on the internet and said, "Have a look at this. Have a look at this." And we had delivered a joint lecture last Friday, and he had then gone online and looked on YouTube and found your clip on YouTube, and he sent me the link to it and said, "Have a look at this. You'll be interested." So when I played what your clip was, and it comes from a lot of your training, it was exactly what we had been talking about in our lectures. This concept of immersive learning, allowing someone to build up pattern recognition, helping them to make better decisions under stress. And I thought, absolutely brilliant. I knew that the military, the British military were doing something similar. I knew that the American military were doing something like it, but yours seems to have taken it a stage further from what I can see in the video clips, and that's really why I was hoping to get chatting to you about it.
Well,
As for me, I'm a retired police officer. I served 29 years with the police in Northern Ireland. I finished as head of the Public Order Training Department within the PSNI, which, as you can imagine, for this place is pretty difficult. We were considered to be the best in Europe when it came to dealing with crowd control, and my job was to train these guys and make sure that they were the best. Ken, on the other hand, is currently still serving, although there's a couple of years left to go, and he was head of the close protection teams who looked after VIP protection for everybody from the Queen to President Clinton, right the way through to various celebrities.
Wow.
So that's really where we come from. About a year ago, whilst we were friends, we would have coffee occasionally. It so happened that I had been doing some work to do with why police officers behave the way they do under stress in relation to riot control. And Ken had been doing similar work totally separately in relation to police officers' behaviour in relation to being VIP escorts. And we realised we're actually talking about the same thing.
Sure.
And since then, we've been doing a lot of work, both for each other and for some universities, about bringing all this together. And we, about June time, delivered our first thoughts on the subject to some international students in North Africa. And it was on behalf of the Scottish Police College. And when they saw it, they said, "That's better than anything we have. Will you come and deliver it and as part of our leadership training for the police officer, the police in Scotland?" Once I did that, then I got another contact from a group called OSCE, that's Operation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And they're an international body from 56 different countries. They've got wind of it now, and they now want it integrated into a manual for all police in the 56 countries that they work in.
Wow, that's incredible.
And really, it really has kicked off. So what's interesting with it is, Brad, it doesn't just apply to police, and it doesn't apply to security services. We're actually finding it applies to sports people as well.
Yeah, it'll apply to anybody who is in any position of decision support, or they themselves in a position of responsibility where they're going to have to perform under duress or under stress. Now, it doesn't really matter what flavor of stress is being imposed upon you, whether you have the ball and you're 10 yards from the end zone with overwhelming defense, or you've found out that there's a laser dot on your chest and you have no support and you've lost comms. Anything that is, quote, an oh shit moment causes people to cognitively unplug and default to whatever level of training is the least perishable. And sometimes when we think we know what we're doing academically, we get this false sense of confidence that we can score correctly on the test and we can answer the questions correctly. But when the heart rate is up and there's legitimate consequences based on the decisions that you make or that might happen to you or those who report to you, that oh shit moment actually has some significant quantifiable meaning. And we ourselves, we're nothing but a tool. I've been called worse, but we're a tool. And if you know how to use that tool or instrument or device or technology, then you're going to be able to behave, and that will not be the most perishable skill you have. When you're under duress or even have taken on board alcohol or whatever, it's your most perishable skill that degradates first. And that can be decision support or any of these things that law enforcement, sports, entertainers, anybody who's in the public eye or where there's going to be consequences based on their decisions directly. It causes people to get all of those things that we know about: auditory exclusion, tunnel vision. I could go on and on. So you're absolutely right on the money with what you're doing. And it sounds like, at least from our perspective, when we started to explore this immersive, hyper-realistic training or reality-based training, RBT, when we started to serve that up, we found that so many people are hungry for it, because here in the U.S., there just isn't a delivery system to get this information down to the guys that need it most. And those are the ones that are on the line, whether it's on patrol or in areas of war and conflict and disaster or crisis. In any capacity, there isn't a resource outside of some of the very boutique elite groups out there. This is nothing new to them, but for the general population that does not have access to this type of training, that is still in a security or first response capacity, there's just nothing there. So I'm happy that you guys have put together some type of exercise or curriculum or workshop. And now, 56 countries have now sent some level of request to you? That's awesome. Congratulations.
Oh. Well, thank you, but really and truly, we're just at the beginning of this. What we've found is that there's a lot of research out there, but the research is all in silo. So everybody has done a little bit, but nobody's looked at the full spectrum. So what we've done is we've drawn a lot of this research in, and then that's where we've started out our own research. So, and interestingly, where your training is for the front line and tactical commanders. A lot of what we're finding is that there are similarities with the strategic and more specifically the operational commanders, who are also under stress, but a different sort of stress. And it's their failure to make the correct decisions at the appropriate times, which is letting down the tactical officers who are on the front line. I don't know if you're coming across that or not.
Absolutely. So very briefly, it really sounds like we are doing exactly the same thing. So we're two entities bonded by a common language. So here is, you talked about these components being stovepiped or silos. We very affectionately refer to those silos as silos of excellence, where here in the United States, we've got a big problem with that because we're so damn big, and the national security apparatus and the homeland security or intelligence construct that exists here domestically and then has tentacles internationally, they have all the technology and all of the willingness and all of the capacity to interoperate and contribute to each other's decision support, but it falls down because of these silos of excellence. There's a lot of folks downrange that don't know that they have colleagues right around the corner that could use a fair amount of their actionable intelligence. So we have been trying as a private entity, in essence a vendor, to teach and train and resource local, state, federal law enforcement, the U.S. military, the U.S. intelligence community, and some select other governments. We've been teaching a lot of this brand new doctrine, which quite frankly isn't brand new at all. It's just repackaged stuff that has been somewhat reserved for the more elite special operations groups and elite intelligence units and varsity teams, we call them. But the fact of the matter is the bad guys and the method of operation of those that plan to do us harm is changing so rapidly. We have to get this information out of the tip of the pyramid and down a little bit closer towards the base, because we believe that the next massive terrorist attack or massive organized crime strike of any capacity, whether it be boots on the ground or even a cyber attack or a virtual attack, it's not going to be thwarted by the Men in Black or James Bond or Jack Bauer or James, Her Majesty's Secret Service, or it's going to be some guy on patrol. And we've found after years of doing this that if you teach law enforcement what to look for, they will go out and find it. It's just that vehicle doesn't exist. And then to your second point, when you saw the video of what we were doing at the Halo Summit, of course, we had a lot of really neat stuff on there, and that was done on purpose because we wanted everybody to see how cool it was and how cool we think we are. And that's to get people excited about it so they want to come. And shamelessly, it's a very effective marketing piece, because who's ever kicked a door or pulled a trigger doesn't watch that video and say, well, what the hell? I want to go to that. Because they want to play. And they want to see the new tactics, techniques, and procedures, and they want to meet with other colleagues and go share a beer and tell some war stories and maybe even some truth. But the fact is, we do have a lot of delegates that come to the summit that are not downrange operators. These are people who are in more leadership or administrative or support roles or analysis roles, because these guys have to see how the paradigm shift is thinking on how operational assets are going to be performing in crisis. And quite frankly, if you don't have the buy-in from the folks with a little bit of gray hair at the temples that have the purse strings, the stallions who are downrange are not going to get what they want, because in the United States, there has to be a requirement before anything is procured. So if there isn't a knowledge of a new doctrine out there or new methods of operation or some new little golden nugget that we might be talking about in training, the younger operators that are more first responders, they're going to see this new stuff and tell their bosses that they want it, and they're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? Never heard of it. That's not how we've always done it. Go, you're shit out of luck. And so having a blend.
We always do what we always did, so we always get what we always got, to quote Mark Twain. Yes, exactly.
Sure. So having a blend of operators that can say, all right, I want that, and we could use that today because I've been downrange, I've seen the enemy in the eye, I know how he behaves, I know his mindset. And the enemy that we're facing today is a little bit different than when those that are in senior leadership and some type of contracting, tender, or procurement capacity. It's just a little bit different. And you can't buy something that's a solution for something you know little or nothing about. So that's what we're endeavoring to do, is letting everybody come play, level the playing field, let all the stripes leave the shoulders, and let everybody sit in a humble way in a class, look at what we believe are current and relevant threats, the methods of operation of those that plan to do us harm, and the different ways that groups in other jurisdictions or even other countries are affecting change with quantifiable results. So having folks from other countries come to our training is beautiful. Now, you've got, with your background and where you served your country, you were in a battle lab. You were in a true laboratory, and you had real world.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty much a lot of what we did is now being employed in Afghanistan and Iraq because, well, to be fair, because of what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, that was the only sort of experience that anybody had to work from.
Sure.
So a lot of the intelligence models and the intelligence systems that are now being engaged there, but even more importantly, the patrol tactics that are being engaged both in Afghanistan and in Iraq. I don't know if you're aware, but the first troops that went into Basra were from the Royal Irish Regiment, who had just finished training alongside us in Northern Ireland before they went there. And they engaged all the tactics that they had learned over 30 years of violence here to walk into the middle of Basra on the first day of the Iraq War. So there's quite a bit, there's a lot of those things that go on, and a lot of those learnings that we have engaged, which are now being used in the field, alongside the new tactics that obviously they've learned from Afghanistan and Iraq, which are, that learning process is all obviously carrying forward.
Well, give me an example of that, because I've shamelessly asked you via email if you can send us some stuff that we can push out to our readership of the Harbinger, which is getting pretty big. I mean, we've got about 60,000 people with a security background that are reading that thing every month. And if you could just give me a quick summary, and I know you didn't work in Belfast directly, you were in more of a suburb, yeah?
No, I worked in Belfast. I spent 21 years in Belfast, and always worked in the most difficult areas. I was in counter-terrorist unit for a good part of that time, and then really because we find crowd control and riot control very much linked to terrorism. And to be fair, if we look at today's problems with protest and counter-protest,
right,
a lot of protest groups, especially those who are borderline aggressive,
sure,
can be seen as areas for recruitment for certainly semi-terrorist organizations or organizations which are on the fringes of terrorism.
Right.
So that becomes a recruiting ground. Well, that's a clear cross example from Northern Ireland, where terrorist groups would have recruited young rioters into their ranks because they had already got them to a stage where they're willing to be violent. It wasn't so much a big step then to take them into a stage where they were willing to be killers.
Sure.
So, that's nothing new, and that goes on right across the world. And in fact, if we look at some of the incidents that are taking place through the Middle East,
right,
that moving, and there's a model there that already exists, which came from Northern Ireland, which comes from protest to riot to terrorism to civil war to revolution, back the way down the line again, is almost identical to what's going on in Libya. And I know this because I've just spent a bit of time in Tripoli, and just before the murder of the American ambassador.
Wow.
And we were warning at that stage, these are the things you're going to see, and you're going to end up going back down that road again. You cannot assume that that's going to be everyth's going to be fine and dandy all of a sudden. Everything has a half-life, and terrorism has a half-life. So it's we liken it to the Russian dolls, where you open a Russian doll and there's another little doll inside,
sure,
and another little doll, and so on. Well, terrorism works that way. It doesn't stop suddenly. It has a half-life, and you have to allow for that half-life in your road towards a peaceful solution. And we were warning Libya of that as early as June this year, and saying, look, this is what's going to happen. You need to be aware of it. And unfortunately, they just weren't organised to recognise the problem with the Katibas and Misrata, and that's why the American ambassador was murdered.
So you were consulting directly to Libyan government?
I was consulting through the Scottish Police College, through the British Embassy that's there, to the chiefs of police and the Minister for the Interior.
Wow.
We were training them and teaching them about this is what's going to happen to your country based on what's happened to our country.
How's that relationship now?
It's still very good. You know, we actually had a group of Libyans over last week before, and they're really keen to take a lot of those experiences back with them. But they absolutely ate it up. They thought it was brilliant. They just didn't have the structure in place within the country to do enough about it. They're very slow to move because, to be fair to them, they've been under an oppressive regime for about 50 years.
Sure.
And they're just learning how to get through, how to incorporate democracy, and it's very much in its infancy there. So whilst they were trying to get their steps moving forward, that vacuum allowed for one of the gangs. The gangs there are called Katibas, and they then, because there wasn't movement quick enough, obviously Al-Qaeda were quick to move in there and get one of the gangs that existed in around Tobruk and Misrata to be more extremist, and they're the ones that caused all the problems. They had an attack on the International Red Cross. They had an attempted murder of the British ambassador just before I arrived. They also had an attempted murder or an attack on the American embassy because they had a consulate down in Misrata, but then unfortunately they actually managed to achieve the murder of the American ambassador, and when they did it, it was a really well organized and orchestrated attack. This was not an accident. It was, there was obviously a bit of work had gone on in the background.
No, it was just a YouTube video.
There was definitely a lot of work went on in that one. You could see that wasn't just some gang went out and decided they would have a go. There was a force in behind it, and whilst I have no evidence to say who it was, you have a fair old guess which country it came from that part of the world. So that's really what some of the work we've been doing this year. But more especially when we talk about this decision making.
Well, before you do that, because I definitely want to spend some time there, but you hit on some things that
sure.
I'd love to explore with you. Number one, what you've done in Belfast and really refining that craft and delivering it against a pretty well-funded, well-fortified, well-appointed opposition that definitely would not consider themselves an insurgency by definition because they're Irishmen in Ireland. But what we've got, if all country allegiances aside, just for the point of this illustration, the methods of operation was insurgency, asymmetric warfare, guerrilla warfare, right. Whatever you want to.
You've got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
Sure.
Irrespective of what your views are. For instance, when I was lecturing in Libya, and I mentioned about terrorist groups, and I mentioned Hezbollah. And one of the interpreters, not one of the Libyans, one of the interpreters objected and said Hezbollah aren't terrorists. And I says, look, they may not be to you, but they do employ terrorist tactics in the way they work. Therefore, they fall under the definition of terrorists. You may support them and you may not like the name, but their tactics are definitely terrorist tactics. And you've got to try and get your head around that. So that if you want to learn from other people, try not to go with the reason why they do it, but understand that the tactics they employ. Because we already know there are links between, for instance, the IRA and FARC rebels in Colombia. We know that there's relationships between the loyalist paramilitaries here in Northern Ireland and the Chechnyan rebels. And we also know that Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda are quite close. So these terrorist groups are talking to each other all the time. In fact, they're training each other. We know for a fact that the FARC rebels were paid, so the FARC rebels paid something in the region of £3 million to the IRA for them to send teams over to train them how to develop bombs, which were developed in Ireland. So we know those links take place. But what's interesting is that our police services don't talk to each other because police officers are naturally quite egotistical and everybody wants to be able to do it themselves. The terrorist groups have got over this. We have to get over it as well. We have to be able to talk to each other, share our views, share our experiences if we want to defeat global terrorism.
Well, if we cross that finish line and do nothing else, then this has been a valuable time on Earth. If we just focus on that critical gap, and that is communications interoperability of actionable intelligence, I mean, that should be an achievable goal. But man on man, I mean, you are a trainer of men and women around the world. You know that that's a pretty big task, largely because of emotion, which really is the segue into a lot of the things that we want to talk about, which is the decision-making process and all the different factors that lead up to that. But before we jump into that, I mean, and this is awesome. I love going down these little rabbit holes because it allows me to hear a little bit more about who you are and what you've done and where you're coming from, because I have a very self-serving agenda here. But having this background and being able to deliver this content from a first-person perspective makes you pretty uniquely qualified for putting together an article for the Harbinger, which might be called From Belfast to Basra.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to do that. There's so many, I don't even know where to start. There's so many sort of stories within that almost 1,500 words doesn't seem enough. You could write a novel on some of it.
Well, that's why we're talking right now, because we'll be able to put this podcast out on our YouTube channel and iTunes and out to Harbinger. So, I mean, in essence, what happens is people subscribe to Harbinger, they read your 1,500 word article, and they say, "Hey, this Allan guy, he seems to have his shit in one sock. I wonder what he has to say." And then they click on the link, and then they hear you and I talking right now. And then they can hear about this little, and it's a little cheesy, but that's kind of what I get paid to do, is bring the cheese factor in. And I think that From Belfast to Basra, an operator's account of exporting TTPs, would be a cool title. And then you can talk about, because all the operators that read Harbinger, they don't want to read a specification manual. They don't want to see an exploded diagram of some kind of, floating barrel, piston shotgun, or they want to see, they want to hear the first person account of the guy who's been there. They don't want to hear some academic pointing about charts and graphs. They want to hear about the guy that went there, because some of the things, and you're the prime example, some of the things that you did in Basra, I'm sure when you're in some of the things you did in Belfast, you're walking the streets of Basra going, "Hey, I saw this movie. I don't like how it ends. I'm going to get the hell out of here."
To be fair, now I have never served in Basra. It was Royal Irish served there, but I'll tell you while we're on, I was in Kampala in Uganda working with the Ugandan police.
Another honeymoon location.
Oh yeah, and I was there. My passion is rugby. That's what I love to watch playing it. I used to play many years ago. I used to coach it. Nice. And so when I've got a bit of off time, that's what I do. That's my sport.
Got it.
So in Kampala in Uganda, they have a rugby club called the Heathens. And they invited me down to watch a game between Uganda and Kenya. And it was an okay game, and as rugby clubs are, once they know you're a rugby player from another part of the world, they're much like cops. You're welcome in their club anytime. So they were very, very genuine, and I was brought into the club, brought lots and lots of alcohol, didn't have to put my hand in my pocket.
Wait a minute. Rugby players drink alcohol now?
Oh yeah.
Now, this is new.
Did you not know that? In fact, it's compulsory. You can't play rugby unless you drink.
You'll be brought up on charges, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. So we had a great time, lovely time at the club. And the following week, because I was on my own, I was advisor there to the chief of police. And because I was on my own, I thought it was the football soccer World Cup finals. And I thought, well, where will I go and watch that? And I thought about going down to the Irish pub, as is every town in the world that had an Irish pub. And I thought, you know what? I'll go to the rugby club because they had invited me. And as I was about to leave the apartment to go down, I spilt a jug of milk all over the floor, and it took me forever to clear it up. There'd been glass gone everywhere. Milk, as you know, if you don't clear it up, especially in that heat, the place would stink.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, so it took me forever, and I eventually went, sod it, I'm not going. Sat and watched the thing on my own TV with a beer, and went to bed.
And then you wake up the next morning.
Before the next morning, the phone rings about 2 a.m. Where are you? Where do you think I am? I'm in bed.
Thank God.
Can you make your way down to the embassy right away? What's wrong? There's been a bomb explosion. In fact, there's been 3 bomb explosions.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, I thought, right, okay. Now, one of them was these were suicide bombs by Al-Shabaab, the Somalian version of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
The first one had gone off in a restaurant, but the other 2 had gone off at the rugby club. 72 people killed. Now, I was going to go there to watch the match. I didn't. And goodness knows why. Somebody was watching over me, but I didn't go that night. And 72 people were killed. And what they had done is they had set off one device, and as the crowd moved away from where the first device had gone off, the second device went off. And you know what? That's typical IRA tactics. They didn't, there must have been some understanding of what would happen to a crowd to allow them to set those 2 devices off separately, albeit they're suicide bombers. But then the local police had no idea what to do. They'd never come across anything like this before. And really, you may as well let a bunch of 5-year-olds loose because they had no idea what they were to do. So I was the only cop there who had any experience of it. And for about 48 hours, I'm trying to advise them the best way to secure the scene, things to be looking for, understanding that suicide bombers work in teams, therefore there's people who got away that you've got to try and find. Really was so difficult for them to understand. It was nearly like talking to children. And then fortunately we had a team arrive over from London who were able to advise on their part of it. And then a massive team of FBI came over because one of the nationals that had been killed had been an American national. And they sent a massive team over, which made a big difference because that then motivated the Ugandan police to start dealing with a crime scene and trying to find those responsible. But you think you've left Northern Ireland and everything will be fine, and no, it doesn't work that way.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're here.
Absolutely.
So did you lose friends and colleagues in that rugby blast? I would think.
No, to be fair, the people who died and what had happened was the club had organised a big screen outside on the pitch because it was so warm, and they put all these seats out. So most of the people who died were just people from Kampala who saw the club was open, knew they could go in and watch the match there, and the club had welcomed them with open arms. Fortunately for me, I didn't know any of them, but unfortunately for them, some of them, the American national that was killed and the people that were with him were over there on a project to help build an orphanage. And the kid that died, I think he was about 21 or 22, and he had obviously come across to Uganda, devoting some of his summer holidays, probably from university or something, to help build an orphanage. Decided to take a day off with some of the people who were helping him to come and watch the soccer match and have a few beers, and not realizing that this was going to happen. So it was very indiscriminate. It wasn't directed any particular group. It was just, let's see how many people we can kill in one night. It was terrible. Quite an awful attack, really. Probably one of the biggest ones I've been involved in, to be fair.
Can you do me a favor and break down that that continuum that you outlined from protest to terrorist and back again? Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, well, really, there's a lot to this. You know, if we look at why you have protest and why, as a democratic society, both in America and in the United Kingdom, we facilitate protest, there's good reason for it. Because people don't just become violent all of a sudden. There are some people who are mentally ill who do become violent for no apparent reason. But the vast majority of us become frustrated. And from frustration, we move to anger to aggression, and aggression to violence. And you can actually see the changes within people as they move along along that continuum. Frustration with political parties or how the country's being run by a group of people, by allowing them to protest and do it peacefully, allows people to vent their frustration, and therefore not stops them from going up that scale to anger, aggression, violence, if you understand. So that's why our democracies are built on this idea that we will facilitate peaceful protest. Unfortunately, cops don't get that, and they quite often see protesters as being the enemy. And that's a difficult thing for them to understand, because cops are traditionally quite right-wing in their view. Protesters traditionally are more left-wing, so there's a very easy to walk into that mistaken dilemma of us and them. It's only whenever you start to see the impact of it, certainly from what we've seen in Northern Ireland, that you understand why facilitation of protest is so important.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate with you before you jump to the Middle East. I hear you loud and clear in a democratic society how we invite people's voice and freedom of speech, and a civil protest is allowed, if not encouraged, in some places, so that we can hear our opposition's voice and overcome whatever objection they've got. From a law enforcement professional perspective, and somebody who's come up through a specific community, through police academy, and basically spend their day and go through their 9 to 5, if you will, being avoided, being lied to, being misled, being deceived, and having their hands tied by bureaucracy and regulatory compliance and use of force doctrine, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Can you not see the law enforcement's perspective of the protester just being the seed of a violent actor, just because they know what's behind it? My analogy to some of the students when we open up these types of briefings is the movie The Matrix. There's a scene there where Morpheus meets Neo for the first time, and he offers him the blue pill or the red pill. Basically, do you want to know? Do you want to know everything that has ever existed, or do you want to stay with your head firmly planted in the sand? I'll say for now, but could be elsewhere, and just go through your complacency and not knowing some of these issues. And law enforcement doesn't. They've taken the pill because they want to know, and not only do they want to know their opposition, they want to do something to defeat it. So yes. I can see how, and I'm playing devil's advocate with you on purpose.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's good. I enjoy the debate.
Well, I just want you to hear your response on how law enforcement's proactive approach to, let's not say profiling, screw it. Let's say profiling, behavioral recognition patterning of the protester, and identifying the protester that is going to exhibit signs and pre-incident indicators of migrating to the aggressor, and then from the aggressor to somebody more violent. Yeah.
Now, you notice I talked about facilitation of peaceful protest. The key word here is peaceful. So where we then see indications that someone is moving towards violent protest, if we have made clear at the start, we're going to help you, we'll do all we can to have a peaceful protest, because you know what, guys? That's what living in America, or that's what living in the UK is all about. Having peaceful protest. See that guy over there? He's not being peaceful. So when I go and deal with him, you've got to understand that he's the one who's not playing by the rules. The difference is, where we create an us and them between the protester and the police, is that the crowd will side with the violent protester because they see the police as the enemy. The trick is to turn the violent protester into the enemy, both for the crowd and for the press. And that's when you come out of that, and when I see cops come away from that, and then they get commended not only by the press but also by other protesters, there's a big feeling of, hey, we really did it right today. But it's when the police are being criticised continually for what they talk about, heavy-handed tactics, and no, it's not heavy-handed tactics. It's because crowd behaviour is such that we've allowed an us and them to happen. What we need to do is the us and them needs to be the police and the peaceful protesters versus all the guys who want to cause disruption and riot. And there's a trick in it, but once you get it done, if you get it right, it really does work, and I've seen it work all over the world.
That's awesome. No, I like that. I wonder if you can just kind of switch to a different gear with me. You mentioned something earlier that was keen to follow up with you on. I spent a fair amount of time in South and Central America, recently in Peru, doing some things with those folks along the Amazon and in the Andes, and quite a bit of what we were doing was related to the FARC and their business relationship with other international subcontractors in trafficking product up through South and Central America and into the U.S. through Mexico. And you had mentioned that you had some data points where you know that there was some financial transactions with regard to training, sharing intel. And were you taught this, or do you have a first-person perspective on this, or was someone that you trusted, they shared that with you, or how did you come to this information?
Well, to be fair, Ken is more the expert on the terrorism side than I am. His master's degree is in counterterrorism. But apparently, we don't talk about stuff that isn't open source. So that is open source that you can find anywhere on the internet. So it's nothing new. I think actually in that case, it's actually been referred to in the likes of the BBC. So
sure.
That's not a new thing. But in terms of funding, it was estimated, I'm fairly sure it's on a BBC website, but it was estimated that FARC paid the Provisional IRA a consulting fee. Now, the consulting fee varies from 3 million to, I think the upper end is 20 million for designing an improvised explosive device and other technical know-how. And as a result, as the Provisional IRA gained this funding, it allowed them to send people over to the FARC to train them. And I don't know if you recall, but a number of those trainers were actually detained by the police there. And that's how we knew that the IRA terrorists were caught with the FARC rebels, actually in their training grounds. So that's how we know that those actually did take place.
Sure. I was just curious if you had any first-person empirical data that links you to it, because we would love to get some of that training done. Clearly, there's plenty of stuff, and we're bound by a lot of the same ethics that if you can't Google it, you can't talk about it. But there are plenty of places where we can talk about this stuff for folks in positions of trust in government, where we can talk about these things and reference them. And it's always, we have kind of a unique identifier where the folks that we bring in to train, the ones that have been there, done that, got the T-shirt, not just read it somewhere or had it whispered by a respected colleague, but this is me. I was there. That's my picture in the PowerPoint. Yeah, I might have been a little younger, a little better looking, a little more in shape, but that was me, and this is what I learned, good, bad, or indifferent. This is what we did. That region and that entire transnational business model of trafficking in money, narcotics, weapons, people, and intel. It is a lot of the same supply chains, a lot of the same people. They're more or less like different boxcars behind the same engine on the same rails. So there's a bit of a shift going on with the FARC changing its role and responsibility of level of authority, bringing cocaine into the United States, and that's been supplanted by, in a measurable degree, by Sinaloa cartel, who's taken it upon themselves to partner with Shining Path and other groups in the Andes, where all that stuff is harvested. And since they have that last mile solution for the FARC, as they grew in power, they were able to take the whole thing from cradle to grave, so to speak. And now the FARC is out, and now they have started to move into other areas, Nicaragua, and other such places where we have folks on the ground. So I just wanted to see if, I can say this stuff all day, but when you say it with your accent, all of a sudden it's got credibility. So,
have you ever heard of the Red Queen race?
No, I don't know who that is at all.
Okay. The Red Queen was named after Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass.
Okay.
And she said in the book, in this place, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And when we talk about terrorism, we talk about the Red Queen race. And the best you can do is just to keep running faster than the competition.
Right.
In other words, we've got to keep ahead of these terrorist groups. The IRA always said, whenever I was talking to an IRA terrorist, they all came out with the same thing. They always said the same thing. It was, you have to be lucky every time. We only have to be lucky once.
Oh, sure.
And that's the truth of it. If we need, the only way we're going to keep pace with international terrorism is we've got to run that little bit faster than they are to stop them from planting more bombs, from flying planes into buildings, from driving boats into ocean liners. Those are the things that we have to be ahead of the game on, and it's a never-ending race, unfortunately.
Are Mexican drug cartels terrorists?
If you look at the tactics they employ.
Wow, I heard a really emotional sigh there.
Yeah, I listen to the reports coming out of Mexico, and some of them are just beyond comprehension. But because of my experiences here in Northern Ireland through the Troubles, the terrorist groups, and I don't distinguish between loyalist and Republican terrorist groups, between the IRA and the UDA, because they all employed the same tactics. But the way they imposed fear on their populace to ensure that they controlled the amount of information that went out is not dissimilar to what I'm seeing in Mexico, although some of the things that are happening in Mexico are that little bit worse. And some of the things that are going on, the use of child terrorists in Mexico, which I've seen come to the fore recently, is almost directly related to what went on in North Uganda with the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA there, and how they used child soldiers. I wouldn't call them soldiers, child terrorists to kill and maim and murder in that area as well, because they knew it would be difficult for the Ugandan army and the Kenyan army to shoot them. They would always hesitate before you'd shoot a 9 or 10-year-old. So there's this horrible psychological games being played there, and it just takes me back to some of the things I've seen here. The idea of manipulating communities, terrifying people to make sure that they will do the will of whatever terrorist group. Yeah, same things.
Have you seen the early adopting of technology by some of these cartels or organized crime syndicates, terrorist groups? These guys have really hot-rodded a lot of the commercial off-the-shelf technology that's available, and even procured a lot of the stuff that is governed by international trafficking in arms regulations. And now we've got not only child soldiers like you talked about, we also have cyber soldiers that are all doing the same age-old crime. And their methods of operation have changed, but their ideology behind it has not. Now, the difference with the cartels is that's not a spiritual or ideological catalyst whatsoever. It's all financial. Now, some of the other groups around the world that you've had the experience of dealing with, they have another mindset behind them. And I think this is kind of how we segue into what it is I originally wanted to talk, which was this whole psychosocial impact of dealing with stress and crisis management internally as your own person, the human, the operator, the officer, the responder, the brother, the son, the father, and be able to stay on target, stay on mission, stay on point, and not completely lose your mind. A lot of the folks that are coming back from deployment, they get it done. They come back alive, and their friends, for the most part, are all intact. But they take such an emotional toll that when they come back, they're changed, sometimes measurably, and it just comes full circle to shooting someone is not the only way to take a life. So having this stress inoculation, the hyper-realistic training, the reality-based training, using a lot of the technologies that we're talking about here, both on the opposition, they've got their gadgets, and we need to keep pace, as you mentioned, also. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because this is your swim lane.
Well, Brad, you've covered so many things there, so I'm going to try and deal with them one at a time.
Please.
The first thing I would talk about here is where we talk about terrorism and the change in terrorism. And the terrorists that I primarily dealt with were those who were planting bombs, carrying out shootings, extortion rackets, drug dealing, that sort of stuff. The terrorist of today is much more sophisticated, and in some cases is much better financially backed. So, for example, if we look at the Somali pirates, the money that they now have access to allows them to be better equipped and better armed than the likes of the Kenyan army who are trying to overcome them. The difference is too, and you alluded to it at the start of this, that today's threat doesn't come necessarily from bombs. If you look at the IRA tactic in 1996, where they bombed the heartland of London's financial area in the Docklands in London, and it cost phenomenal amounts of millions to repair the damage, and it also it threatened the infrastructure not only of the United Kingdom but also of Europe, because a lot of European money goes through London because that's just the way the setup is. That then forced the British government's hand to do certain things in terms of negotiated settlements. So the IRA saw that as a great tactic to employ. But today's terrorist doesn't have to do that. Today's terrorists can do that online through cyberspace.
Right.
And whilst we talk about the tangible battle of dealing with gunmen or bomb makers or those people who are going to actually physically kill someone. There's also another war that goes on to do with security, which is about trying to stop these cyber terrorists who can be just as destructive, if not more so, than those who would plant a bomb in the likes of the Docklands of London. So the terrorist principle has moved quite considerably. And as money is being poured into some terrorist groupings from various areas, then the understanding is that we'll see terrorism move in different forms. But let's not lose sight of the fundamental basic terrorist and the harm and damage they can do. Sometimes we rely very, very heavily on technology and new inventions to be a panacea. In other words, to cure all our problems. In truth, 70% of the information that we get today about terrorists comes from the spoken word, comes from interactions with the community, interactions with people. So there's still the old techniques that need to be adhered to. Yes, we can incorporate some of the new ideas, but never lose sight of how we deal with terrorism. And a lot of it is about communicating, about talking to people. And young people today have great difficulties with that. If you look at young people from the Western world, they don't communicate face-to-face. They do it by text. I remember training student police officers, and I'm trying to teach them how to engage with somebody who's aggressive and violent. So I'd say to them, think of the worst conversation you've ever had, and have who was it? And invariably it was to dump a boyfriend or dump a girlfriend, or on a couple of occasions it was actually to dump both. And you'd say to them, right, okay, think of that conversation and how did you do it? 70% of them said, I did it by text. Now, when you take those young people, put them in a uniform, give them a bit of training, and then put them into a world like Afghanistan, where people don't use cyberspace anymore, their ability to communicate, to engage with people, even with the language barrier, there's non-verbal communications too, which they just don't understand, but people in those countries understand all too well. So we're creating a world so far devolved from some of the places where these terrorists are being recruited from. We are causing problems for ourselves in the future, so we need to understand that. The other, does that answer that question for you? Okay.
No,
so far?
Without a doubt. Really, what I'm trying to do is solicit these answers, because okay. I'm just scribbling down notes, and then I'm gonna make a volume out of them and then roll it up and pound you over the head with it in a minute. So no, this is good. No, because we're online here, and because we both got microphones, and you and I are taking advantage of this medium that we're talking about right now. This is going to be really good because everyone can hear your voice. They can hear you talking about it. This is going to come across way better than if somebody read all of this. And this was like an interview in like Rolling Stone, where I ask a question in bold type and your answers in italics. So this is, by all means, the very descriptive, long-winded answers are super cool.
Okay. Well, let me take you to the next part of your question, which was about post-traumatic stress and what happens after we ask people to engage for long periods of time with this type of work. The first thing I'm going to do to you is commend a friend of mine to you, and she's a Californian girl. She lives in California. She's a girl called Karen Lansing. And Karen has a book called The Right of Return, and I would commend it to anybody who's interested in trying to figure out post-traumatic stress, whether it's be to police officers or to military. Because you know what? The amount of soldiers that we have coming back from Afghanistan and previously from Iraq that really we need to understand what's happening to them, because we've asked them to do a job, but nobody has any comprehension unless you've been there at just how difficult that job is and what they have given up. They have given up a great big swathe of their life that they'll never get back again. And it's not until you experience it do you understand. And I'll give you for instance. My brother is still a serving police officer, and he served in a different part of Northern Ireland to me. And he and I used to compete both for the police and nationally in pistol shooting, combat shooting. And he was way better than me, although I'd never admit it to him.
You know I'm recording this, right?
Yeah.
So he's going to hear it.
No, he's not. I'll not tell him it's on there.
I'll edit that part out. It's fine.
I'll deny it. But yeah, he was way better than I was. And he was always really, really good. He could draw, he could shoot, he could hit whatever. He was great. And as our career paths changed, I ended up doing the anti-terrorist stuff. He did all the community work. But he always said, when the day comes, nobody's going to take me on because I'm just too damn good. And I think as time went on, he really believed it. Except one day, when he really did need help, the terrorist did shoot him, but he shot him in the back, and my brother didn't have a chance to draw his gun. He didn't even see the bullet coming. Shot him in the back. Now, Jim survived, but he suffered terribly from post-traumatic stress. And it was this thought process that I'll be okay, I'm fine, I've prepared all I possibly can for the day when I need to use my gun. And when that day came, he didn't even get a chance. So it really screwed up his head quite a bit. And to be fair, Karen was the very girl that brought him back to the real world. But those sort of things that happen to both soldiers and to police right throughout the world, the normal public just don't understand the sacrifice that people make. If you go up to them and you've got a bullet wound or you've lost a limb, people will look and see a physical deficiency and say, well, that's a terrible loss. And it's true, it is a terrible loss. But for those people who have suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, there's no visible thing. There's no sign around their neck. But what they have gone through can be just as traumatic as those who have gone through a gunshot wound. So, we have no idea just how many people out there have suffered mental trauma through the job that we need them to do so that we can sleep safe in our beds at night. And it's that concept of there are brave men on the wall each night to allow us to sleep safe in our beds, and that's absolutely true.
Wow. So we're both in violent agreement with each other, which is really the catalyst for our talking today. There are new methods of training and different modalities and some training doctrine that is emerging out of this need to not only identify PTSD, but begin, arguably the Western world has identified PTSD, has funded some therapies, and is really good at looking after some of the folks that have it in different ways. But what can we do as trainers, understanding that PTSD is a measurable threat out there that is not very quantifiable through a physical exam? How do we inoculate people? Is that possible? We talk about terms like stress inoculation and immersive experiential training and teaching people muscle memory. And, this goes beyond academic. This is physical manifestations of cortisol and adrenaline and, massive adrenaline dumps into the bloodstream so that we can control fight or flight and harness that energy and complete our mission and save our partners' lives. And hopefully they're going through the same training to save ours. Where's the merit in that? And what have you seen are the milestones of success that prove that we're on to some new paradigm shift here?
Okay, well, you know what? Let's take it really back to basics. I think sometimes, and certainly I've been guilty of this as well as other people, that we do things, they seem to work, but we're not 100% sure of why they work. So let's go back to the human brain and figure out, how do we make decisions? And what we've discovered is there are three separate entities here. Rational decision making, in other words, where we weigh up the options, we think about it, we take advice, we look at intelligence coming in, we maybe go and speak to a few people, we sleep on it maybe, and then we come to a conclusion, is the best way of making decisions. And in those cases, we most often get the right answer or the best answer under the circumstances. Those circumstances are great and they're wonderful. The trouble is they don't allow themselves the luxury of time. Once you start to compress time, your ability to make decisions becomes more difficult. So you no longer have the ability to weigh up options. You may not be able to grab all the intelligence coming in. And bear in mind that today's world, our intelligence that comes in, especially because we're able to use sophisticated methods, means that we have more and more intelligence coming in, and we have to pick through it to try and get the right stuff that's going to help us make our decision at the end of the day. So, in fact, rational decision making is something that we only use for less than 10% of the time. The vast majority of the time we use intuitive decision making. In other words, our brain, based on its experiences, throws up what it believes is the best answer under the circumstances, and we will go with that. Let me compare it to driving a car. When you learned how to drive a car at the very beginning, you got into the car, there was a wheel and there's gear sticks and there's pedals and there's switches and some guy teaching you or some woman teaching you how to drive. And you had to consciously think about how to do it, and it was quite strenuous. You're really focusing on turning the wheel the right way and pressing the right pedal at the right time. And for those of us in the United Kingdom who usually use manual cars and not automatics, we had to get that terrible thing of getting the biting point of whenever your gear was just right and you had your clutch out far enough that the car would move forward. Something that was really hard to do, and you had to really focus hard. That was rational thinking. Now, because we've been driving for a while, we don't do that. We get into our car, we drive to work, and we don't really think too much about it. In fact, if you try and remember your journey to work a week ago last Thursday, I would say you probably couldn't, unless something happened on that journey to make you remember it. It's what we do for about 90% of our day, intuitive decision making. We see a problem in front of us, and our brain selects the right answer based on its previous experiences. The other type of decision making is instinctive. That's where the amygdala kicks in and says, you know what, you're in danger, you need to do something. And that's what we talk about, fight or flight. When we move into those three, if we look at those three areas of decision making as part of the brain, when we overlay it with what you talk about, the chemical cocktail or the influence of various chemicals into our system, because that's what happens under stress, if you try to be rational in thought when your body's already released those chemicals into your system, you can't do it. Your brain no longer can engage rational thought. However, some people try and do it. And that's what we see in some people, and we call it choke. And it's like the kids who've performed really well at school all year. They've really looked good, and their teachers think they're great until they go into the pressure of an exam, and then they choke. They can't perform well in an exam situation because their adrenaline has started to kick in, but their brain is no longer able to engage that part of the brain which looks at rational process. On the other side of it, if we allow ourselves to get too much adrenaline into the system, allow ourselves to get so far down that road of fight or flight, then we get a thing called brain lock. And that's where you see people just unable to make any rational decision at all. where they just stand there almost like a screensaver and just look dumb. And there's some good work on that, which we came up with very recently, and it was from a book about the Survivors Club. And it was from people who were parachute enthusiasts jumping out of airplanes, which to me seems a bit stupid, but there you go. Jump out of a perfectly serviceable aircraft with a parachute on. And in years gone by, every so often somebody would die because their parachute had failed to open. But more recently, they've managed to develop a device which will automatically deploy the reserve parachute at a certain altitude if it hasn't already been deployed. So for those people, they were able to say, well, look, you didn't pull your cord for your primary parachute, and you didn't pull the one for the reserve parachute. It had to deploy automatically. What happened? And a lot of these people are saying that the adrenaline had got so much, they just couldn't remember what to do. Absolutely no recollection of whether to make a decision or how to make a decision. Once they got back in terra firma, they then calmed down. They recalled, yes, I have to pull this ripcord here, and if that doesn't work, I pull that one. But at the time, nothing. So basing that on our experiences with training police officers, we start to see where that kicks in, where on some occasions people go to choke, i.e. they're desperately trying to engage rational thought when the brain's no longer able to do it. Or on the other side, where there's brain lock, where they just have gone so far down the adrenaline road that they cannot engage any sort of thought processes at all, apart from possibly fight or flight. What your training is doing is developing their pattern recognition so that the body isn't engaging so much adrenaline that is getting into that brain lock situation. But it's also taking them to a position where they're having more patterns. And as we get patterns put together, our brain clumps them together. So the more we do, the better we become. So that they're able to make better intuitive decision making. And by doing that in training, they will then replicate that in real life. But it's important that it's full immersive learning, not just judgmental, but immersive learning, so that the training is so close to reality that their brain recognizes the same patterns. Does that make sense, Brad?
No, it absolutely does. You're underscoring our entire doctrine and business model for this kind of training. And you know what you're saying is it's almost like you've bugged our conference room as we were developing a lot of this curriculum and workshops and training programs that we're doing now in a mobile training team. And what would be fun to do is, I want to push this podcast out there, see if we can't evangelize some of this stuff through your voice, because I don't disagree with anything that you've said on this. And get you writing for Harbinger a bit so that we get some folks in our community to know who you are. And we'll spend a year doing that. And we'd love to bring you out to the Halo Summit for next October. And I know that it sounds far away, but from a logistics standpoint, putting an event like the event that we put on, it takes a year to put it together. So
I can believe it.
We haven't even washed our hands of this one. We're still in the post-mortem of the 2012 summit. But for 2013, we'd love to get some of your gray matter out here to San Diego on this island so that we can not only have you stand up in front of the room like an academic with your PowerPoint. It's a tactical PowerPoint advancer, by the way, with a sport grip, and we'll give you some trigger gloves. But then what we'd love to do is work collectively with you and collaboratively with you and Ken so that we can develop some modalities of putting some people into our mobile kill houses, use our non-lethal marker rounds, and put people in the gear and make them go through scenarios that we come up with and create a cumulative learning experience. So first they understand what we're trying to do, then we go do some basics, then we make it a little bit more advanced, then we make it very difficult, and then at the end we put some opposition in there that shoots back, and then have an after action or some kind of debrief where we say, okay, how do you like me now? Because there just isn't that kind of training out there. I mean, it exists, but unfortunately it exists in these silos that you so eloquently described earlier. It's not like you and I have got struck by lightning and we've had this miraculous moment. There's people doing this, and there's people that are going to listen to this podcast and read these articles and agree. But there's going to be a whole bunch more, unfortunately. They're going to be like, what the hell are these two going on about? And it's not going to be until they run through our kill house and go through our gauntlet that they realize that they're better now. But
you've got to remember something here, mate. As well as that, the courts are going to be asking for this soon. The courts are going to be saying, why wasn't that person trained better?
Okay.
And if there's better training out there, which is what you're talking about, why aren't you training your officers up to that standard? There's a famous American case of, is it Tuttle versus Oklahoma, where a police officer shot someone, and the court there said, why was this officer not trained better when there's better training out there that he could have done? And I think you're not only on the button with this, but I think there's a time will come where people will come along and say, you know, it's no longer acceptable to go and put little holes in paper targets. This is not, you know, this is now, we're in the 21st century. We need to have immersive training, which is exactly what you're doing. And other people are going to have to catch up. They must catch up if we want to have a better standard of police officer, a better standard of soldier, and allow them the best chance they have of survival.
Well, Allan, we're not doing this alone. We'd like to do it with you and the others that you know. The moment you think you've got it wired and that you're qualified to train and no longer be a student is the day you stop learning. And unfortunately, the bad guy is constantly changing his reason and method for doing us harm. So what did you say? Was it the Queen's race?
The Red Queen.
The Red Queen's race.
Queen.
Okay.
You've got to keep running, yeah.
Well,
you've got to keep running just to stay still.
That Red Queen's race reminds me of my inbox on my Microsoft Outlook, but it also works towards this training. We're never going to go out of business, and as long as we're young enough to train this stuff, we have an obligation to. So let's do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Absolutely.
Well, Allan, you're my hero, and I want to invite Ken to get on one of these things, and maybe the three of us can do another one of these as soon as you guys are able, because I'd love to be the tennis ball in between your very capable rackets, and let's do that.
Well, we've got to the stage now where because we present together quite a lot now, it turns into a bit of a double act between us.
Well, let's do it.
Fun. It's quite good fun.
You guys can be a couple of bartenders behind the bar, and you can just serve up the training, shot by shot.
Absolutely. No. Brad, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've really enjoyed that.
Well, I appreciate your time and winning the Spontaneous Award and sending me an email and then getting here on Skype and letting me immortalize you into digital media. And
I nearly forgot. Is it okay if I have to do this presentation in Istanbul next week? The reason why I emailed you, is it okay if I reference your training when I'm talking about this intuitive decision making?
Yeah, of course. If you want to go to the Halo YouTube channel, it's just the Halo Corp, no spaces, TheHaloCorp. You can download all of the hyper-realistic and immersive training. If you need me to send you some stuff, I've got some.
No, that's brilliant. That's pretty much what I was wanting. All I wanted is to be able to show people this is why your training has to be that way. You know, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing at the minute is really for commanders, because when you see your soldiers or officers in the front line experiencing fear, what you then see from commanders is anxiety. The trouble is the effects are actually the same. So you can see brain lock and choke in commanders sitting in control rooms, the same as you will see it in frontline officers. The trouble is the influence that one person in a control room will have is much greater than the one person on the front line. So you've got to try and get them trained as well so that they don't fade out. And as I'm sure you've seen from the article I sent you on Hillsborough, which is exactly what happened there, where as soon as things went wrong, instead of taking command, the commander just locked out, did nothing, and 96 people died. So that's why, it goes right through from strategic commander right the way through to tactical commander on the front line. All of them need to have this sort of training.
Well, Allan, now that you know Halo and you and I have met, you're never going to get rid of us. And I'd like you to make plans to being in the States for October next year.
Sure.
You've seen the types of training we do. You've seen the trainers we bring. You've seen the keynote speakers that we attract. And we have to make the training as current and as relevant as possible. And to your point, because nobody's doing this to the degree they should, and pretty soon the courts of the world are going to require this, we've got a pretty significant obligation to get this stuff out there and be evangelists of this new method of training.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate your time, Allan, and I've taken an hour and a half of your time. I don't know what time it is in Ireland, but God bless you and the work you're doing. I appreciate you.
That, and you too, Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to getting Ken and I talking to you. I think you'll find Ken even more instructive than I am. He's an incredible brain on the guy, and we'll have fun. We'll have fun.
Awesome, Allan. We'll talk to you soon. Be good. Go get some sleep.
God bless.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. I just want to make you aware of another way you can get a lot more granularity and detail about the topics that we discuss here on the HALOcast, and that's from our magazine, The Harbinger. This goes out to local, state, federal law enforcement, military, members of the intelligence community, and of course, listeners to the HALOcast. If you want more information on how to sign up, go to our website, which is www.thehalocorp.com. Once you're on our homepage, click Harbinger, and there you can see about a year's worth of archived episodes and issues that include a lot of the same subject matter that we cover here on HALOcast. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.